What led you to being in the Army?
Well, when I got out of high school, I was going to go become a X-ray technician. So I went to Greenfield Hospital for 1 year to study X-rays, and found out that the second year I had to work Saturdays, which I don't think they told me before we started. And at that time, my parents were very poor, and I would have had to get rent a room, and pay for it, and my parents couldn't afford to pay for it. And so I said, I have to work Saturdays to pay my way through now. And if I have to stop working Saturdays, I can't afford to pay for my transportation. So I said, I'll go into service. So I dropped out of that school, and when I went to sign up for the Army, back then you could sign up for what you wanted, and if the Army didn't give it to you, you could get out, okay? So I signed up for X-ray, and they were full. And I said, well, what am I going to do now? So I said, you know what? The laboratory was open. So I said, I'll go into medical technology. So I signed up for that, went to the medical technology school down in Fort Sam Houston, Texas, and that's where I stayed the rest of my life in the lab. But I went to X-ray school for a year, you know. And it came in handy because when I was in the service, and even back here when I was at the hospital, sometimes if they needed coverage for a night or two in X-ray, I knew how to, do the work still. And I covered that. Where I was stationed in Paris, France, in our dispensary, we had X-rays, and I'd worked there sometime over there. So it came in a little bit handy, but mainstay was medical technology.
So you were stationed in Paris as an Army medic from 1964 to 1966.
Yes.
Tell me about moving your family to Paris.
Well, we were newly married, and when I went to Overseas Replacement Company, my APO number, where their mail is, they gave us our APO numbers, and I came home for leave, and everybody says, where you going? And I said, I going someplace in Germany. Yeah, because there was 24 of us, I think, in our lab class down in Fort Sam. And 23 of them I know were going to Germany, so I figured I'd be going to Germany also. So we got down to Overseas Replacement. They decided, to say, if anybody doesn't know where they're going, come up and ask. So I went up and said, where am I going in Germany? And he goes, you got to be kidding me, right? I said, no, why? I said, all my friends know where they're going, but I don't know. He said, you're not going to Germany. You're going to Paris, France. He said, you got the number 2 assignment in Europe. I said, I do? He said, yeah, because I've been telling my wife is going to go to Germany. So I called her up that night, and I said, honey, when we get overseas, where do you want to go? She said, well, I'd like to go visit Paris. I said, well, how'd you like to live there for a year and a half? She says, what do you mean? I said, well, that's where I'm stationed. She said, really? I said, yeah. So she couldn't come at first. I went over in November. We was on the troop carrier ship we was on. We was on that the night President Kennedy got assassinated, and we hit a big storm, and it was quite an experience. I'll tell you that was. And when we got there, I found out I rented an apartment. I had to rent an apartment, and then I sent for my wife, and she was pregnant at the time, and our first son was born in Paris, and we stayed there. She was there about a year and a half, and then I brought her home in July, and I had to go back till December. And I ran my own laboratory in this dispensary that we ran over there for the soldiers.
You said you found out about the Kennedy assassination on the ship to France. How did you find out?
They, over the intercom, it was, I think it was about 9 o'clock at night. We was in a terrible storm, believe me. And they came over and said that they had just found out that President Kennedy had been assassinated that day. And of course, we had no other way, and nobody had cell phones or anything then. So that's how we learned out about it. Of course, everybody was in shock. Here we are, halfway across the Atlantic. Not much you can do anyway or see. No TVs in the ship or anything. So we just had to really wait till we got to France, port over in France, and then you could get a hold of a newspaper and find out. But that's all we knew about it, that he was assassinated. So and that was another day and a half after, because it took us that long to get over there on the troop carrier.
Did you have a sense of how the French people were reacting?
Not for a while, because when we first landed, we were in a train station for almost a whole day waiting for the guys from the military to pick us up, and then they took us directly to the military bus that took us directly to the train, took the train down to Paris, and then it was put up for a week. So I didn't really get to see anything or talk to anybody for almost 2 weeks, and by then the excitement or whatever had wore off. So they were very sad. I think the French thought a lot of President Kennedy, and but they didn't like American troops too much. But they did not like Americans in Paris.
Did you have negative interactions with anyone while you were there?
Well, because we mostly hung around with Americans, GIs and this stuff. Because when you went out, if you didn't speak the language, if you were outside of Paris, down towards Normandy and this stuff after the war, you were the greatest thing that happened. They loved American GIs, but the Parisians did not like Americans. And you'd have thought they would after a couple of world wars, but they didn't.
What was every day like for you and your family there?
We became very close to the other guys that worked in the dispensary, because one of the worst part is when you rent an apartment or anywhere you go, if you don't speak the language, it makes it a little difficult, you know. We learned to say a few phrases and stuff, but we spent most of the time in the dispensary where I worked, or at the PX and stuff. The buses would take us out to the commissaries and to the clubs and stuff at the PX. So you were Americans, GIs, and their families. And in the apartment building where I worked, where I lived, there was 3 other American GIs and their families. And in fact, we became lifelong friends with 2 of them. We became best friends. They lived 2 doors down from us. They're the ones that found the apartment for us.
So you said in Paris the French people didn't really like Americans unless you're around Normandy because of D-Day, right?
Right, because of the troops. You know, when they parachuted in and landed, the stuff. They remembered. But the Parisians probably they were all younger and richer and all this stuff, and probably didn't live through any of the wars. And they kind of resented Americans, they did, and it's too bad, but that's the way they were. I don't know how it is today, but I know when we were there, you just didn't even want to wear some of our uniforms that looked like the German uniforms, the hats and stuff, and they would tell us, do not wear that anywhere outside of the work and this stuff, because they didn't want you to. But they weren't. The Parisians weren't the friendliest people.
So, being born during World War II, is there any memories or stories you have about that time?
No, because I was just born. The war was over by the time I grew up to remember anything. My first recollections of times like that was during the Korean War, when I remember older guys going off to the service and this stuff. But back in then, no, I don't have any recollections of that. But when I was in Paris, I was there, like I said, 63 and 64. They hadn't had a chance to rebuild Paris, the city itself, that much, because only from 44 and 45 to 64, it's only 20 years, and you don't rebuild a city in 20 years. And a lot of the old buildings were still there that had been destroyed and stuff. There was still sites of the war back then that we saw when we was going around Paris.
Tell me about climbing the Eiffel Tower.
Eiffel Tower was quite interesting. Like I said, we never knew till we got there when you go up. And first time we went up on the first landing, on each base of the foot, they looked like enormous tanks, or probably 20 feet across and out on high. And you see them moving. And I goes, what the heck is that? It balances the Eiffel Tower. If the Eiffel Tower moves, these go up and down to balance it, keep it perfectly steady and this stuff. I never realized that till we saw that. And then you could take the elevator up if you wanted, but we back then it was 19 or 20 years old. We walked up, but it was quite an amazing view. And from our apartment, look out there at a little balcony. You could look and you could see the Arc de Triomphe in the distance and the Eiffel Tower. So it was pretty neat. But it's quite a structure, the Eiffel Tower.
Were you there for Bastille Day?
Yeah, that's their big holiday in July. Yeah, they used to have quite large parades up and down the Champs-Élysées, which is a road from the Arc de Triomphe down to the Louvre. They would have quite big parades every day. And it was quite a party atmosphere. And we joined in as much as we could.
You like to party?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
During the time you were in Paris, were you writing back home?
Definitely. I was here 3 months alone, then at the end, 5 months. And I wrote every day. I think, if I remember, wrote every week to my brothers and sisters and parents. I think it was weekly. But I usually wrote my wife every day. Gives you something to do, and that stuff. Not long letters, just enough to, a few lines to say you're still there and that stuff. But yeah, I definitely kept in touch with that.
How was it having your first child?
It was great. He was born on Nolan Ryan pitched a no-hitter that day. We were in Paris, France, and she was in a Paris American hospital. And like I said, I remember because I was listening to the game, but it was funny because one of our best friends was there. She was off duty, and she heard she was in labor, so she was a nurse at the Paris American Hospital, and she came in special to be with her during the labor and stuff, and they were great. Of course, over there, when my son was born, he became a dual citizen. He was a citizen of France or a citizen of the United States, because he's automatically, he was born there, but a citizen here because he was born of a military serving abroad. So he's automatically a citizen of the United States. But until he was 21 years old, if he had wanted to declare his citizenship as French, he could have. But of course, he chose to be here, but he had that opportunity. And then when I went down at the French town hall in Courbevoie, the town we lived in, I had to sign a paper saying that he was born there, right? They had Timothy, Michael, Herk, but in Italian, Michael is spelled M-I-C-H-E-L-E. Well, they thought that was a girl, so they had listed as a girl. And I go like, wait a minute. I said, no, he's not. It's not a girl. His name's Timothy. Oh, Michelle. I said, it's not Michelle. It's Michele in Italian. So I had to pay extra money to get it changed to make sure he's listed as a boy. That was only right the first week he was born. But yeah, it was pretty neat. You get to, when you first see him come home and first child. Well, I remember when we came home from I had never seen a newborn baby before, and she unwrapped him to change a diaper. Of course, his legs went like this, and I goes, "What the hell's wrong with his legs?" And she says, "Why?" I said, "They're crooked like this." She says, "Yeah, well, he's newborn." They said, "They'll straighten out." I figured a newborn baby would be straight legs like this, but they weren't. Baby's legs like this. God, I was worried something was wrong with him, but it turned out okay. But when you never seen it before, no.
How was it like raising him in Paris?
There's not very much because you didn't have any neighbors you knew, so he didn't have any friends. He was only a year and a half, just under 2 when we brought him back, but. Besides taking him out to our friends or taking him to the neighbors and this stuff, there wasn't much to do with him. We'd take him for walks outside, but there was no place to bring a child that age back then. No place we could bring him in Paris or anything. So he didn't get much exposure until we got him back here to his cousins and this stuff. And he finally met some other kids and this stuff, at that age. But pretty much until then, he was stuck with us in the apartment.
What was your favorite thing to do in Paris?
Mainly, we went to the NCO club at the place, the big military base here, because and if you go around Paris, we'd go to some of the shows. They had movie theaters there. We'd go to that showed movies in English. We would go to those. But of course, with a young child, you don't go too many places and that stuff. Mainly, got around with our neighbors and friends, fellow GIs. We'd get together at their houses and have parties and stuff, And but like I said, didn't have a car, so if you wanted to go anywhere, you had to take the subway or a bus to the subway and then take the subway. Well, if you got a 6-month-old child, you didn't do much of that. So we didn't do too much until you got older.
How did you end up learning French?
Continued use. You'd pick up a few sentences every week. You'd hear them say, if you heard somebody say it enough time and they'd do this, you say, that's what that means. You need that. And we had my dispensary where I worked, we had 2 French doctors and an American doctor and a French nurse. And she was very good about telling us how to, like say, quelle heure, what est-il, what time is it, She'd say these sentences, and she'd say, you want to know how to say this? Say, yeah. And she'd teach you 2 or 3 sentences a week or so, And pretty soon you could, I had like a quarter French vocabulary. You could quite a few things you could ask what to do and how to do it, but not major. But you get enough to get along. That's all you needed, enough to get along. And so that's what we did.
Did you like learning it?
Oh yeah, I think anytime you can learn anything like that, yeah. And it made it easier on the outside if you're over there, Like sometimes you want to know what time it is or how much does that cost in the store. But they're not asking. Then you say combien per, you'd learn it. So it made it a little easier. So yeah, anytime you could pick up any knowledge, it made it easier for you getting around the whole town. So
What's your connection to the Orange American Legion?
Orange American Legion. It is now the Donald J. Hurdle Post 172 American Legion. We just had the post renamed after him. He was a gentleman, a good friend of mine. He was bar manager for 50 years over there, and he passed away 2 years ago. And we renamed the post after him. And he got me in to be on the board of directors, and I went and became the finance officer for the post. And now until we get somebody else to do it, I'm doing the payroll, still on the board of directors, but doing the payroll and stuff over there. I think it's a very, very fine organization. We donate a lot of money to the towns. We give scholarships. We probably give $10,000 to $15,000 a year to the town of Orange, and we give scholarships to any active member of the club. You don't have to be from Orange. If you're a kid, like if I live in Athol and my grandkids get scholarships, if you're a paid-up member of the club, you can apply for scholarships. We support Boys State, and I see you have a shirt on your Boys State. We just sent 2 this year to Boys State. We have a very generous auxiliary now from the Orange Legion, which the greatest group of girls now that they've donated probably close to $8,000 or $10,000 since December that they've raised to the food banks, the veterans right over here, the next two doors down. They've given them like $2,000 to give out to needy vets and this stuff. It's a very active post for the community, and it's the greatest bunch of people around. It's an excellent club, and I'm very proud and happy to be a member there.
You ever work at Boys State?
No, we've sent every year. We send 2 down there, and usually they pick them and they talk to us. We have them come talk to our meetings, and then when they come back from Boys State, we ask them to come back and tell us what they've learned down there. I think it's a great program, and and the ones we've been lucky, the ones that have come back, usually they've been very happy, and they said they learned a lot more than they thought they would by going. So even though I've never been, I think it's a good program, and we've got nothing but positive reports on it from the kids that have been there. So that's why we keep supporting it.
When you came back, what was the community of veterans like?
Back when I first came back here, again, because of transportation and having a young family, I didn't really get involved with the veterans organizations probably for 8 or 10 years. But once my kids got older and got out of the house and married, had more time because I always had a couple of part-time jobs, so I never had much time to do any of that stuff. Once the kids grew up and left, and I had times to go. Then I joined Legion and that stuff. More time to go over and socialize with old vets, and have a few beers with them, and talk politics and this stuff, and just a good friendly time with them. And that's what American Legion homes are about. It's for veterans, and that's why the government gives you tax exempt, because it's strictly for military organizations, and it's for veterans to go have a good time and spend some good hours.
Did being in the military change your political views?
No, I don't think so. This country is the best, and you do what you got to do to protect it. And my theory has been, the minute you put one soldier in harm's way, you should put all the military might you got behind him, because he is an American soldier. And if he's willing to give his life you should do what you can to protect them. You know, if you've got military might, you're going to send that guy in there, back him up. And because I've been in a lot of countries, and believe me, there is no other place you want to live in this country. And I've always believed in a very strong military, and whatever you got to do to protect them. And these people, the vets, when they offer to give 3 or 4 years of their life to this country, it means something. It means something to them, and it should mean something to the whole country. The service it gave me my education, and I think it makes you grow up faster, and it makes you realize, like I said, I didn't go to college before, how important that education was after, so I went out on a GI Bill. I think there's a whole lot. It teaches you discipline, and back then, even the service was more disciplined, because when you went into service, GI stands for government issue. And like when I was working in a lab, and if a soldier came in, didn't want to have his blood taken, right, they'd have MPs hold him down and say, you know what, you're going to do it. Couldn't do that today in public life because you'd be sued. But your body belonged to the government. You were a government issue, and they would make you, do these things. And the discipline, I think more kids, when I know some kids that were doing terrible in life, and back those days, if you went to court, the judge could say to you, 90 days or military. And the kids that chose to go into service, 9 out of 10 would come out and say it's the best thing that ever happened to them. It straightened them out. They got disciplined and this stuff to learn an education or a profession, and it was very good. I think the military, I'm one of those that I think the country should have, everybody in the country should have like a 1-year mandatory service. A lot of the European countries do. And every man, every woman should have to put a year at least, or 2 years into their country. And I think it would be an excellent thing. But of course, it's not going to happen here. But I think it's a good thing. I see it in European countries, and I've never heard anything negative from any of the young people that I knew over there. So, but no, I think the military is an excellent choice for some people, especially if you don't know what you want to do in life, and you know if you want to go a certain way. And the military has the school for it. Like I said, the military schools are some of the best around. So don't ever hesitate to not take advantage of that.